The steam from the locomotive hung in the air like a gray shroud, mixing with the dust that never seemed to settle in this forgotten corner of Wyoming territory. Eleanor Whitfield pressed her handkerchief to her nose, trying to filter out the acrid smell of coal smoke and livestock that permeated the ramshackle depot. Her traveling dress, once a respectable navy blue, now bore the stains of 3 days' journey from Boston each mile, taking her further from everything she'd known and closer to a future she'd bargained for in desperation. The platform beneath her feet was nothing more than rough-hewn planks, gaps between them wide enough to catch a lady's heel. She steadied herself against a post, her single carpet bag clutched in white-knuckled fingers. Around her, the bustle of frontier life played out in harsh detail, cowboys spitting tobacco juice, merchants hauling crates, and women whose painted faces told their own stories of survival. "That her?" A man's voice cut through the din. "The mail order one." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin high. She'd known what she was getting into when she'd answered Samuel Morrison's advertisement in the Boston Herald. Respectable rancher seeks wife. Must be hardy, willing to work, fine home and security assured. The letters they'd exchanged over 6 months had painted a picture of a decent man, perhaps rough around the edges but honest. His photograph showed a clean-shaven face with kind eyes. She scanned the crowd, looking for those eyes now. The noon sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the layers of her corset and chemise. Where was he? The train had arrived 20 minutes ago, and still no sign of Samuel Morrison. You, Eleanor Whitfield. She turned to find a stocky man with graying whiskers and clothes that hadn't seen wash water in weeks. This couldn't be Samuel. The photograph had shown a younger man, clean and presentable. "I am," she replied, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Are you Mr. Morrison's man? Has he sent you to collect me?" The man's laugh was harsh as crow's caw. "Morrison, that yellow-bellied snake ain't coming. Miss saw him this morning at the saloon, drunk as a skunk and boasting about how he fooled another Eastern girl into coming out here." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, the platform suddenly feeling unsteady beneath her. "I don't understand. We have an agreement. Letters." "Letters don't mean spit out here," another voice chimed in. A woman in a gaudy red dress had sidled up, her eyes both pitying and calculating. "Happens more than you'd think. Men get lonely, write pretty words, then lose their nerve when it comes to actually taking a wife. Or they find their entertainment elsewhere." She gave Eleanor an appraising look. "You got money for a ticket back east?" Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her purse. She had exactly $3.47 what remained after purchasing food during the journey. The return fare to Boston was $28. Might as well have been $1,000. "I thought not," the woman continued. "Well, if you're needing work, Ruby's Palace is always—" "That's enough, Scarlett," a man's gruff voice interrupted. "Leave the lady be." Eleanor barely registered the exchange. The crowd around her seemed to press closer, their whispers growing louder. Another fool girl. Should have known better. What'll she do now? Their words buzzed like angry wasps, each sting driving home her humiliation. She'd sold everything to come here, her mother's pearl brooch, the family Bible, even her winter coat. Her position at the textile mill was gone, filled the day she'd given notice. There was nothing to return to in Boston except shame and poverty, worse than what she'd left. "Miss you all right, miss," someone was speaking to her. But Eleanor couldn't focus on the words. The sun seemed too bright, the air too thick. She'd been so certain, so careful. How could she have been such a fool? A commotion erupted near the freight depot. Horses whinnied in alarm, and men shouted warnings. Eleanor looked up in time to see a team of draft horses breaking free from their handler, the heavy wagon behind them careening wildly across the platform. People scattered like chickens, but Eleanor stood frozen, her mind still reeling from the revelation of Morrison's betrayal. "Look out." The wagon bore down on her, its iron-rimmed wheels crushing everything in their path. Eleanor's body finally responded to the danger, but her skirts tangled around her legs as she tried to move. She stumbled, falling to one knee just as the horses thundered past, close enough that she felt the heat of their bodies and smelled the sharp tang of their sweat. The wagon's corner caught a stack of wooden crates, sending them flying. One crashed down inches from where Eleanor crouched, exploding in a shower of splintered wood and nails. She threw her arms over her head, certain that this was how her foolish adventure would end, crushed beneath freight in a no-name depot, mourned by no one. Strong hands seized her shoulders, hauling her upright and pulling her clear just as another crate smashed into the spot where she'd been. She found herself pressed against a solid chest, arms like iron bands holding her steady as the chaos continued around them. "You hurt," the voice rumbled through the chest she was pressed against, deep, steady, with a trace of something that might have been Texas in its drawl. Eleanor tried to answer, but found her voice had fled along with her composure. She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without dissolving into the tears that threatened to spill. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain it was true. The man's hold loosened slightly, but he didn't let go entirely, as if he knew her knees might buckle. Eleanor finally looked up at her rescuer and found herself staring into eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue, sharp and assessing. He was tall enough that she had to crane her neck, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a face weathered by sun and wind. Not handsome in the conventional sense, his nose had been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. But there was something solid about him, unmovable as mountain stone. "Seems you've had quite the welcome to Cedar Ridge," he said, his tone dry as dust. "This your first time in Wyoming territory?" Eleanor found her voice at last. "Yes, I was supposed to—" The words stuck in her throat. How did one explain such humiliation to a stranger? "Morrison," he said, not a question but a statement. Those pale eyes hardened to flint. "Heard he was expecting a bride." The crowd had regathered, drawn by drama as surely as flies to honey. Eleanor felt their stares like brands on her skin. Her rescuer seemed to notice too. His jaw tightened, and he shot a look at the gawkers that sent several stepping back. "Thank you for your assistance," Eleanor managed, trying to reclaim some dignity. I need to—" What find lodging she couldn't afford, beg for work, accept the painted woman's offer. "You got people here, anyone expecting you besides Morrison?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice again. He studied her for a long moment, those sharp eyes taking in her travel-stained dress, her empty hands, her carpet bag lost in the chaos, and her face that she knew must show every bit of her desperation despite her efforts to hide it. "Name's Jacob Thornton," he said finally. "I run the Triple T Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Just lost my cook to marriage last month." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I'm offering you a job. Miss Whitfield, fair wages, clean quarters, and honest work. No strings, no expectations beyond what any employer would ask. You interested?" Eleanor stared at him, searching for the trap. In her experience, men didn't offer help without wanting something in return. But Jacob Thornton's expression remained neutral, patient, as if he had all day to wait for her answer. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Because Morrison's a coward and a drunk who doesn't deserve the dirt on your shoes," he replied bluntly. "Because my men are tired of eating beans and burnt biscuits. And because—" He paused, a muscle working in his jaw. "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn." The crowd was growing restless, their whispers rising again. Eleanor caught fragments. Thornton's taking her. Always was strange. What's his angle? She had two choices. Trust this stranger who'd pulled her from danger, or stay in town and face whatever desperate measures survival would require. The painted woman's scarlet still lingered nearby, her expression knowing. "I accept," Eleanor said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. When do we leave? Something that might have been approval flickered in Thornton's eyes. Soon as I finish my business in town. Can you ride? I can learn. This time she was certain the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. That's the spirit. Wait here. I'll collect your belongings and arrange transport. My carpet bag. I'll find it. He turned to go, then paused. And Miss Whitfield, don't let them run you off. Half these vultures came here the same as you, looking for something better. They just forgot what courage looks like. He strode away, the crowd parting before him like water before a ship's bow. Eleanor stood straighter, drawing on reserves she'd thought depleted. She was still frightened, still humiliated, still uncertain of what she'd agreed to, but for the first time since stepping off that train, she didn't feel entirely alone. The sun continued its merciless assault, and the whispers continued to swirl. But Eleanor Whitfield held her ground. She'd come to Wyoming territory to start a new life. It might not be the life she'd imagined, but it was a beginning. And in the unforgiving landscape of the frontier, sometimes a beginning was all anyone could ask for. The wagon ride to Triple T Ranch tested every ounce of Eleanor's resolve. Jacob Thornton handled the team with quiet efficiency, navigating ruts and stones that threatened to shake her teeth loose. She gripped the wooden seat, trying not to notice how her rescuer's presence filled the space beside her solid, unmoving, smelling of leather and honest sweat. They'd left Cedar Ridge behind an hour ago, and the landscape had opened up into endless grassland punctuated by distant buttes. The sky stretched overhead, so vast it made Eleanor dizzy. In Boston, buildings had hemmed in the horizon. Here, there was nothing but earth and sky and the ribbon of dirt they followed. You'll want to get different clothes, Thornton said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. What you're wearing won't last a week out here. Eleanor glanced down at her traveling dress, already showing wear from just the journey. I'm afraid this and one other are all I have, Mr. Thornton. We'll fix that. Martha, that's Ben Cooper's wife, she's about your size. She'll have something suitable you can borrow until you can make your own. The practicality of it, the matter-of-fact way he addressed her situation without pity or judgment, eased something in Eleanor's chest. I'll pay for whatever I borrow. You'll earn it, he corrected. The Triple T isn't a charity. You work, you get paid fair wages. What you do with those wages is your business. They crested a rise, and Eleanor caught her breath. Below them spread a valley with a creek winding through it like a silver snake. Buildings clustered near the water, a main house, barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the grasslands, and she could see riders moving among them. Welcome to the Triple T, Thornton said. And for the first time, she heard something that might have been pride in his voice. As they descended into the valley, Eleanor studied the ranch with growing amazement. This was no hardscrabble operation. The buildings were well maintained, the fences straight and strong. Whatever else Jacob Thornton might be, he was clearly successful at his trade. Dogs rushed out to greet them, tails wagging. Thornton called them off with a sharp whistle. Men emerged from various buildings, curiosity plain on their faces. Eleanor straightened her spine, knowing first impressions would matter. Boys, Thornton called as he brought the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. This is Miss Whitfield. She'll be taking over the cooking and household duties. You'll treat her with the same respect you'd show your own mothers and sisters, or you'll answer to me. That clear? A chorus of "Yes, boss" rang out. Eleanor counted at least a dozen men, ranging from a boy who couldn't be more than 16 to a grizzled veteran who might have been 60. All of them stared at her with expressions ranging from hopeful, probably thinking of better meals, to skeptical. Thornton climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands were careful at her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. Ben, he called. Bring Martha out here. A comfortable-looking woman in a practical brown dress emerged from one of the smaller buildings. Wiping her hands on her apron, her face was kind but shrewd as she took in Eleanor's appearance. "Lord have mercy, Jacob," she said. "What have you brought us?" "Miss Whitfield's taking over the kitchen," Thornton replied. "She'll need some proper clothes and settling in. Can you help?" Martha Cooper's expression softened. "Of course. Come along, dear. Let's get you sorted." Eleanor followed Martha toward the main house, aware of all the eyes tracking her movement. The house itself was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories of solid timber construction with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. It spoke of permanence, of someone who'd built for the future rather than just survival. "Don't mind the men," Martha said as they climbed the porch steps. "They're good boys. Mostly. Just haven't seen a proper lady in a while. You'll have them eating out of your hand once they taste real cooking." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor even more. While clearly masculine in its furnishings, heavy leather chairs, mounted antlers, Indian blankets, it was clean and organized. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Mr. Thornton seems very—" Eleanor searched for the right word. "Organized." Martha snorted. "That's one word for it. Man runs his ranch like a military operation. Has to, with this many hands and this much land. Come on, I'll show you the kitchen." The kitchen took Eleanor's breath away. A massive cast-iron range dominated one wall, with plenty of workspace and a well-stocked pantry. Everything was quality, from the heavy pots hanging on hooks to the sharp knives in their block. "He had this all shipped from Denver when he built the house 5 years ago," Martha explained. "Said if he was going to hire a cook, they'd have proper tools to work with." "But you said he just lost his cook last month." Martha's expression grew careful. "That was old Tom. Before him was Francisca. She stayed 2 years before her husband took her to California. Before that—" She shrugged. "The Triple T has had its share of cooks. It's not easy work, and some can't handle the isolation." Eleanor ran her hand along the smooth surface of the work table. "And Mr. Thornton, is he difficult to work for?" "Jacob Thornton is the fairest man in Wyoming territory," Martha said firmly. "He pays on time, doesn't tolerate any nonsense toward womenfolk, and he'll back his people against anyone. But he's also—" She paused, choosing her words. "He keeps himself apart. Don't expect warm conversations by the fire. He'll treat you right, but he won't be your friend." Eleanor nodded. After Samuel Morrison's false warmth in his letters, she could appreciate honest distance. "And my quarters?" "Through here." Martha led her to a door off the kitchen. "You've got your own room luxury out here, let me tell you." The room was small but private, with a proper bed, washstand, and even a small wardrobe. A window looked out toward the creek. After months sharing cramped quarters in Boston boarding houses, it seemed palatial. "This is wonderful," Eleanor said, meaning it. Martha studied her with those shrewd eyes. "You really were coming to marry Morrison, weren't you? Not just some story?" Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, half the women west of the Mississippi came here for a husband or running from one. No shame in it." Martha's voice gentled. "Morrison's a fool and worse. You're better off here, though I suspect you don't feel that way yet." A bell clanged outside, making Eleanor jump. "Supper bell," Martha explained. "Tom used to ring it, but the men have been fending for themselves since he left. They'll be expecting something tonight, especially with you here." Panic fluttered in Eleanor's chest. She'd cooked in the boarding house, helped in the mill's kitchen when extra hands were needed, but feeding a dozen hungry ranch hands. Martha must have read her expression. "I'll help you tonight. We've got beef stew simmering. Tom made a pot before he left, and the boys have been adding to it all week. Probably tastes like boot leather by now. But it'll do. Tomorrow, you can start fresh." They worked together, Martha showing Eleanor where everything was kept while they sliced bread and gathered plates. The men filed in as the sun touched the horizon. hat in hand, filing past to wash at the pump outside before entering. Jacob Thornton came last, having changed from his town clothes into work gear. He took his place at the head of the long table, and Eleanor noticed how the men automatically left the chair empty for him. "Gentlemen," he said once everyone was seated, "Miss Whitfield has had a long journey and is just getting settled. You'll mind your manners." Eleanor and Martha served the stew, which was indeed as bad as Martha had predicted. But the men ate without complaint, sneaking glances at Eleanor when they thought she wasn't looking. She caught their names as they talked Frank, the foreman, Eduardo and Carlos, brothers from Mexico, young Danny, who blushed every time she came near, Roberts, the grizzled veteran who'd probably seen everything twice. Miss Whitfield, one of the younger hands, ventured, "Where you from?" "Boston," she replied, refilling his coffee cup. "Long way from home," another commented. "Yes," she agreed simply, not elaborating. She felt Thornton's eyes on her, but didn't meet his gaze. After supper, the men filed out, several tipping their hats and mumbling thanks. Eleanor began clearing plates, noting what supplies she'd need, what she could do with the pantry's contents. Martha helped her wash up, keeping up a steady stream of advice about managing the wood stove, where to find things, which men had food preferences. "Frank can't abide onions," she said. "Eduardo and Carlos like their food with heat. There's a jar of peppers in the pantry. Danny's still growing, eats twice what the others do. And Mr. Thornton." "What about Mr. Thornton?" Eleanor asked when Martha paused. "He's particular about his coffee, strong, black, and hot. Have it ready when he comes in at dawn, and you'll start the day right." Through the kitchen window, Eleanor could see Thornton on the porch, silhouetted against the dying light. He stood alone, looking out over his land with the stillness of a man comfortable with solitude. "He wasn't always like this," Martha said quietly, following Eleanor's gaze. "But that's not my story to tell." After Martha left, Eleanor stood in her new kitchen, trying to absorb the day's upheaval. This morning, she'd been a mail-order bride. Tonight, she was a cook on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, working for a man who'd saved her from humiliation but seemed to carry his own shadows. She thought of Morrison, of the dreams she'd built on his lies. Then she looked around the well-appointed kitchen, thought of the fair wages Thornton had promised, the respect he'd demanded the men show her. Perhaps Martha was right. Perhaps she was better off. A soft knock at the kitchen door interrupted her thoughts. Thornton stood there, hat in hand. "Settling in?" he asked. "Yes, thank you. Mrs. Cooper has been very helpful." He nodded. "Few things you should know. We eat breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Men pack their own lunch if they're riding out. Sunday's half day. You'll only need to do breakfast and leave something cold for supper." "I understand. You need anything from town, give Frank a list. He goes in every 2 weeks. He paused. "And Miss Whitfield, you see any of the men giving you trouble, you come to me. Don't try to handle it yourself. That clear?" "Very clear, Mr. Thornton." He studied her for a moment, those pale eyes unreadable. "You did well tonight. The men appreciated having a proper meal, even if it was just warmed-over stew. Tomorrow will be better," she promised. "I'm counting on it." He turned to go, then paused. "That took courage today. Accepting my offer. Not many would have." Before she could respond, he was gone, his boots echoing on the porch boards. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the barn. Above, stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. She'd wanted a new life. It seemed she'd found one, though it looked nothing like what she'd imagined. Tomorrow, she'd face her first real test in this kitchen. But tonight, for the first time in months, she had a door she could close, a bed that was hers alone, and the promise of honest work for honest wages. It was enough, for now. It was enough. the rooster's crow came too early, but Eleanor was already awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch stirring to life. Through her window, she could see the first pale light touching the eastern hills. Coffee. Martha had said to have it ready when Thornton came in at dawn. She dressed quickly in one of Martha's borrowed dresses, practical calico that allowed for movement, and twisted her hair into a simple bun. The kitchen was cold, and she hurried to stoke the stove's banked embers back to life. By the time boot steps sounded on the porch, she had coffee brewing and was mixing biscuit dough. Thornton entered, bringing the scent of hay and horses with him. "Morning, Miss Whitfield." He hung his hat on the peg by the door. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton. Coffee will be ready in a moment." He nodded, washing at the kitchen pump before taking his seat at the smaller table near the window, clearly his accustomed spot. Eleanor poured the coffee, black as Martha had instructed, and was rewarded with something that might have been approval in his expression. "What's for breakfast?" he asked. "Biscuits, gravy, eggs, and bacon. Will that suit?" "Better than what we've been having." He sipped his coffee, watching as she worked. "You're up early." "I've always been an early riser," my mother used to say. She stopped, focusing on the bacon sizzling in the pan. "Used to say what?" Eleanor glanced at him. Surprised by the question, he waited, patient. "She used to say the morning hours were when God did his best thinking, so we should be awake to hear it." Wise woman. She was. Eleanor turned the bacon, glad for the excuse to look away. "She passed 3 years ago. Consumption." "I'm sorry." The simple words, offered without false sentiment, meant more than elaborate condolences might have. Eleanor nodded, continuing her work. Soon the kitchen filled with the smell of baking biscuits and frying meat. The men began filing in, drawn by the aromas. Their reactions to the spread, she laid out fluffy biscuits, creamy gravy. Eggs cooked just right were gratifying. Danny actually moaned when he bit into his first biscuit. "Miss Whitfield," Frank said, "I don't suppose you know how to make apple pie." "I do." "Well then," the foreman grinned. "Welcome to the Triple T Permanent-like." Even Thornton's mouth twitched at that. Eleanor found herself smiling as she refilled coffee cups and brought out more biscuits. This was familiar work, feeding hungry people, and she knew she did it well. After breakfast, the men headed out to their various tasks, leaving Eleanor to clean up and plan for the next meal. She explored the pantry more thoroughly, making mental notes. Plenty of beef, of course, and staples like flour and beans. But she'd need vegetables, more eggs, proper spices. She was kneading bread dough when young Danny appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Ma'am, mister, Thornton said I'm to help you today. Fetch water, carry things, whatever you need." Eleanor smiled at the boy's obvious nervousness. "That's kind of him. Could you start by bringing in more wood for the stove?" As the morning progressed, Eleanor found her rhythm. The bread rose on the warming shelf. Soup simmered for dinner. And she even managed to start a batch of cookies with the last of the sugar. Danny proved helpful, eager to please and full of chatter about ranch life. "Been here 2 years now," he told her while peeling potatoes. "Mister, Thornton took me on when nobody else would. Said every man deserved a chance to prove himself." "Where's your family, Danny?" His face clouded. "Don't rightly know. Pa lit out when I was small. Ma tried to keep us together, but," he shrugged, "fever took her and my sisters. I was on my own after that." Eleanor's heart ached for the boy. How many stories like his were scattered across this harsh land? "Well, you're not on your own now." "No, ma'am. Mr. Thornton. He's fair, tough, but fair. And Frank's teaching me everything about cattle and horses. Figure in a few years, I might have my own spread." The noon meal was a success. The soup, thick with vegetables and beef, disappeared quickly, along with the fresh bread. Eleanor noticed Thornton watching her as she served. his expression thoughtful. "Miss Whitfield's making cookies for tonight," Danny announced proudly, as if he'd done the baking himself. "Is she now?" Eduardo grinned. "What kind?" "Molasses," Eleanor replied. "Unless someone has a different preference." A chorus of voices erupted, each man stating his favorite. Eleanor held up her hand, laughing. "One at a time, gentlemen. I'll try to accommodate everyone eventually." The afternoon passed quickly. Eleanor organized the kitchen to her liking, started preparations for supper, and even found time to mend some dish towels. The domestic routine soothed her, made her feel useful and grounded. She was pulling the cookies from the oven when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Through the window, she saw Thornton riding hard, another rider keeping pace. They pulled up at the barn, and she could see urgency in their movements. Minutes later, Thornton burst through the kitchen door. "Miss Whitfield, I need hot water, clean cloths, and whatever you have for bandages. Quickly." Eleanor didn't waste time with questions. She grabbed the kettle from the stove, gathered clean dish towels, and remembered seeing a box of medical supplies in the pantry. She followed Thornton to the bunkhouse, where men were gathered around one of the beds. Carlos lay there, his face gray with pain, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. Blood seeped through a tear in his shirt. "Horse spooked," Frank explained tersely. "Threw him into a fence post." "Arm's broken," Thornton said. "And that gash needs cleaning. Someone ride for Doc Patterson." "I'll go," one of the men volunteered, heading for the door. "Doc's in Cheyenne," another called after him. "Won't be back for 3 days." Thornton cursed under his breath. Eleanor stepped forward, setting down her supplies. "Let me see." The men parted, surprised. She examined Carlos's injuries with careful hands, remembering nights in the boarding house when factory accidents brought bleeding workers to their door. Her mother had been the one everyone called for help. "The break is clean," she announced, "but it needs setting before the swelling gets worse, and that cut needs stitching." "You know how?" Thornton asked. "I've done it before." She met his eyes steadily. "Unless you have someone else." "Do what you can." Eleanor took charge, issuing orders with quiet authority. "I need 2 straight boards for splints, strips of cloth for binding. Mr. Thornton, can you hold him steady, Frank? The whiskey from the pantry, he'll need it for the pain." The men scrambled to obey. Eleanor cleaned the gash first, relieved to find it wasn't as deep as the blood suggested. Her hands were steady as she threaded a needle from the medical box. "This will hurt," she warned Carlos. "Danny, let him bite down on this leather." She worked quickly, making small, neat stitches while Carlos groaned through the leather strap. The men watched in silent amazement as she closed the wound, applied a clean bandage, then turned her attention to the broken arm. "Mr. Thornton, I need you to hold his shoulder. Frank, when I say pull his hand straight and steady. Carlos, look at me." She waited until the injured man's eyes focused on her face. "My mother set my arm when I was 12. Fell out of a tree. It hurt like blazes, but she fixed it good as new. I'm going to do the same for you." Carlos nodded, trust in his pain-filled eyes. On 3, Eleanor said, "1, 2. The crack of bone settling into place was audible. Carlos passed out, which was a mercy. Eleanor quickly positioned the splints and began binding them, her movements efficient and sure. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," someone whispered. "Where'd you learn that?" "Boston's factories aren't much safer than your rangeland," Eleanor replied, tying off the binding. "People get hurt. Someone has to help." She checked Carlos's pulse, satisfied to find it steady. "He needs rest and watching. The arm should heal clean if he doesn't jostle it. I'll need to check the stitches in a few days." Thornton helped her gather the supplies. His hand briefly touched her elbow as she stood, steadying her. "That was well done." Eleanor realized she was trembling now that the crisis was past. "My mother taught me. She said healing hands were a gift not to be wasted." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was—" Back in the kitchen, Eleanor washed the blood from her hands, trying to calm her shaking. She'd helped with injuries before, but never as the one in charge, never with so many depending on her. A knock at the door made her turn. Several of the men stood there. Danny in front, holding something behind his back. "Ma'am," Frank spoke for the group, "we wanted to thank you for helping Carlos and, well..." Danny brought forward what he'd been hiding, a small bouquet of wildflowers, somewhat wilted from being clutched in nervous hands. "We picked these," Danny said, "to say welcome proper-like." Eleanor's eyes misted. She accepted the flowers, breathing in their prairie scent. "Thank you, all of you." "Also," Roberts added gruffly, "if you're still of a mind to make those cookies..." Eleanor laughed, the tension breaking. "I believe they're cool enough now. Danny, would you pass them around?" The men filed through, each taking cookies with thanks. Even Eduardo came from the bunkhouse to get some for Carlos when he woke. As the kitchen emptied, Eleanor found Thornton still there, leaning against the doorframe. "You've had quite a first full day," he observed. "Not what I expected when I woke this morning," she admitted, arranging the wildflowers in a mason jar. "Life out here rarely is what we expect." He paused. "The men respect what you did today. Not just the doctoring, but the way you handled it. No fuss, no dramatics, just what needed doing." "It's what anyone would have done." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Their eyes met and held for a moment. Eleanor felt something shift in the air between them, some recognition or understanding. Then Thornton straightened, reaching for his hat. "Supper at 6, he asked, back to business. "Of course. Beef stew and biscuits. And there are cookies for dessert." He actually smiled then, a brief flash that transformed his weathered face. "I'll make sure to save room." After he left, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her day's work bread cooling on the counter. Cookies disappearing one by one as men found excuses to pass through, the wildflowers adding a splash of color to the windowsill. Through the window, she could see the sun settling toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, somewhere in the bunkhouse. Carlos was resting with his mended arm. In the corrals, Danny was learning his trade, and throughout the ranch, men were ending their day's labor knowing they'd have a good meal waiting. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered Samuel Morrison's advertisement, but standing here, flower in her hair and satisfaction in her heart, Eleanor thought it might be something better. She'd found a place where her skills mattered, where her contributions were valued, where hard work earned respect. The Triple T Ranch was beginning to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. 3 weeks into her employment at the Triple T, Eleanor had settled into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. The men no longer stared when she served meals. Carlos's arm was healing well, and even the taciturn Roberts had been heard to whistle after breakfast. She was checking her rising bread dough when the storm rolled in. The morning had been still and oppressive, the air thick enough to chew. Now, black clouds boiled over the mountains like spilled ink. "Bad one coming," Frank said, stopping by the kitchen. "We're bringing the remuda closer, getting everything battened down. Might want to have extra coffee ready. It's going to be a long day." Thunder cracked overhead, and the first fat drops of rain splattered against the windows. Within minutes, the drops became a deluge. Eleanor watched through the kitchen window as men ran for cover. Horses whinnied in alarm, and the world disappeared behind sheets of water. She kept coffee hot and sandwiches ready as men came in throughout the day, soaked and muddy. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it intensified as afternoon wore on. "Never seen it this bad this early in the season," Roberts muttered, dripping on her clean floor. Eleanor was lighting lamps against the premature darkness, when Danny burst through the door. "Miss Eleanor Mister, Thornton needs you at the barn. Quick." She grabbed her shawl and followed him into the storm. The rain hit like cold fists, soaking through her dress instantly. They slipped and slid through the mud, Danny pulling her along. The barn was chaos. Men crowded around one of the stalls, their voices urgent. Eleanor pushed through to find Thornton kneeling beside a prone figure. It was Ben Cooper, Martha's husband. His face was white as paper, his breathing shallow and rapid. One leg was twisted beneath him at a terrible angle. Beam came down. Thornton explained tersely. "Caught his leg. We got him out, but—" Eleanor dropped to her knees, heedless of the mud and straw. She ran practiced hands over Ben's leg, feeling the wrongness beneath the skin, not just broken, shattered. "Martha?" she asked. "Danny's gone to fetch her." Eleanor's mind raced. This was beyond her simple bone-setting skills. The leg needed a real doctor, someone who could piece together what was broken inside. But Doc Patterson was still gone, and in this storm, no one could ride for help. "Get him to the house," she ordered. "The kitchen table. I need hot water, all the lamps you can find. And," she looked at Thornton, "your sharpest knife, and a bottle of the strongest whiskey you have." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "You heard her. Move." They carried Ben through the storm on a makeshift stretcher. Eleanor ran ahead, clearing the kitchen table, laying out clean cloths. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, Eleanor, all you can do is your best and pray it's enough." Martha arrived as they were settling Ben on the table. Her face was stark with fear, but she didn't fall apart. "What do you need me to do?" "Hold his hand. Talk to him," Eleanor said, rolling up her sleeves. "Mr. Thornton, I need you to hold his shoulders. Frank, his other leg, he's going to fight us." She examined the leg more carefully in the lamplight. The skin wasn't broken a mercy, but she could feel bone fragments shifting beneath. If she didn't set it properly, Ben would never walk right again. Might not walk at all. "I've never done anything this complex," she admitted, meeting Thornton's eyes. "But if we don't try—" "Do it," he said simply. Eleanor poured whiskey over her hands and the knife, then gave Ben a generous swallow. "This is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt," she told him honestly. "But I'm going to fix it. Martha's here. We're all here." Ben nodded, gripping his wife's hand. Eleanor felt along the break again, mapping the damage in her mind. Then she looked at each person holding Ben. "No matter what happens, don't let go." She grasped Ben's ankle and knee, feeling for the right angle. "Lord, guide my hands," she whispered, then pulled. Ben's scream rattled the windows. His body bucked against the hands holding him, but they held firm. Eleanor felt bones grinding, shifting. Not right yet. She adjusted her grip, pulled again. Another scream. Martha was crying, whispering prayers. The men's faces were grim with effort. "Once more," Eleanor said, sweat running down her face despite the cold. She could feel it now, could sense where the bones wanted to go. One more pull, with a slight rotation. The bones slipped into place with an audible click. Ben went limp, unconscious. Eleanor quickly felt along the leg. Not perfect, but aligned. The fragments were where they should be. "Splints," she commanded. "Long ones." They worked together, Eleanor directing, the others following her lead. She bound the leg carefully, immobilizing it from hip to ankle. Throughout, she kept checking Ben's pulse, the color of his skin, the warmth of his foot. "Will he—" Martha couldn't finish the question. "The bones are set," Eleanor said carefully. "The rest is up to time and the good Lord. He needs to stay completely still for at least 2 weeks. No weight on that leg for 2 months, maybe 3. She cleaned up while the men carefully moved Ben to the small room off the parlor that served as a sick room. Martha went with them, holding her husband's hand. Eleanor was washing blood from her hands when she realized she was shaking. The weight of what she'd just done, the responsibility of it, crashed over her like a wave. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, turned her around. Thornton stood there, his pale eyes intense. "You did good," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, you did more than anyone could have asked." "What if I was wrong? What if You weren't wrong. I watched you. You knew exactly what you were doing." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Only a fool wouldn't be. But you didn't let the fear stop you." His hands were warm through her soaked dress. "That's courage, Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it, combined with the intensity of the moment, made her breath catch. "I should check on him," she said, but didn't move. "Martha's with him. You need dry clothes and something hot to drink." He steered her toward her room. "Go change. I'll have coffee ready." Eleanor changed into her other dress, also borrowed from Martha, and wrung the water from her hair. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Thornton had not only made coffee but was frying eggs. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a chair. "You missed supper." "So did you." "I'm not the one who just performed a miracle." She sat, too exhausted to argue. He placed a plate in front of her: eggs, bread, some leftover beef. Simple food, but her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. They ate in companionable silence while the storm continued its assault outside. "Finally," Eleanor asked, "why did you trust me to do that? You barely know me." Thornton considered the question. "I've learned to read people pretty quick out here. Have to, when your life might depend on them. You're steady. You do what needs doing without fuss. And you care not just about being liked, but about doing right. You got all that in 3 weeks." "Got most of it that first day at the depot." He poured more coffee. "When everything had gone to hell and you were standing there with your world crashed around you, you didn't cry, didn't beg, just lifted your chin and asked what time we were leaving." Eleanor remembered that moment, the humiliation, the fear, the desperate gamble of accepting his offer. "I was terrified." "I know. That's what impressed me." A knock interrupted them. Frank entered, water streaming from his slicker. "Ben's awake, asking for Miss Whitfield." Eleanor hurried to the sick room. Ben was pale but conscious, Martha at his side. He managed a weak smile when Eleanor entered. "Martha says you put me back together," he said, his voice hoarse. "I did my best." "Doc Patterson couldn't have done better," Martha said firmly. "I've seen him work. You have the gift." Eleanor checked Ben's leg, satisfied to find the splints holding and his foot warm to the touch. "The hard part's going to be keeping you still long enough to heal proper." "I'll tie him down if I have to," Martha said, but her eyes were soft with gratitude. "Thank you. I know what you risked, trying something like that. If it had gone wrong—" "But it didn't," Thornton said from the doorway. "And we'll make sure Ben has everything he needs to heal up right. Cooper, you're on full wages until you're back on your feet." Ben's eyes widened. "Boss, I can't work." "You've given me 5 good years. Triple T takes care of its own." Thornton's tone brooked no argument. "Miss Whitfield, I believe you've done enough doctoring for one day." Back in the kitchen, Eleanor found several of the men waiting. Word had spread about what she'd done. They didn't say much that wasn't their way, but Danny brought more wildflowers, and Eduardo pressed a small carved wooden cross into her hands. "For protection," he said simply. After they left, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by the day's events. She'd come here to cook and clean, to earn wages and start over. She hadn't expected to become part of something larger, a community that looked after its own. Thornton appeared one last time before heading to his own quarters. "Storm's passing," he said. "Should be clear by morning." "Mr. Thornton, what you did for Ben, keeping him on wages, that was kind." He shrugged. "Man can't work with a broken leg. Shouldn't lose his livelihood because of bad luck. Not every employer would see it that way. I'm not every employer. He paused at the door. You've brought something to this place. Eleanor. Can't quite put my finger on it, but it's been missing for a long time. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying storm and the settling house. She touched the wooden cross Eduardo had given her, felt the smooth grain worn by patient carving. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to peek through the breaking clouds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meals to cook, Ben to tend, the aftermath of the storm to handle. But tonight, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death, the sense of being exactly where she belonged. The Triple T had tested her today, pushed her beyond what she thought she could do, and she had risen to meet it, had proven herself not just as a cook, but as someone who could be counted on when trouble came calling. In the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered. The sound should have been lonely, but somehow it wasn't. It was just another voice in the vast Wyoming night, another creature finding its place in the wide, wild world. Eleanor banked the stove for the night and headed to her room. Tomorrow would come early, as it always did. But she would meet it with steady hands and a full heart, ready for whatever challenges the Triple T might bring. The autumn evening wrapped around the ranch like a comfortable blanket. Eleanor sat on the porch steps, her mending basket beside her, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of copper and rose. 6 weeks had passed since she'd arrived at the Triple T, and the rhythm of ranch life had become as natural as her own heartbeat. Mind if I join you? She looked up to find Thornton standing nearby, hat in hand. It had become something of a ritual these past 2 weeks after supper. When the dishes were done and the men settled in the bunkhouse, he would appear with some excuse to linger. Of course not. She moved her basket to make room. He settled beside her, maintaining a proper distance but close enough that she caught his scent of leather and sage. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Ben's walking better, he said eventually. He's stubborn enough to heal quick, Eleanor replied, smiling. Martha has her hands full keeping him from overdoing. Good thing he married a woman as stubborn as him. That's what makes a marriage work, I suppose, being matched in determination. She felt rather than saw him glance at her. You ever think about it, marriage? Eleanor's needle paused. I thought I was thinking about it when I answered Mr. Morrison's advertisement, but I realized now I was thinking about escape, not marriage. And now I think about whether I remembered to put beans to soak, and if Danny's going to remember to bring the eggs I asked for, and how to stretch the flour until Frank goes to town. She smiled softly. It's a simpler kind of thinking. But better. Yes, she said without hesitation. Better. He picked up a small stone, turning it between his fingers. I was married once. Eleanor's hands stilled completely. In all their evening conversations, he'd never mentioned this. Her name was Catherine. Came from back east, like you. Her father was my business partner when I was starting out, trying to build something from nothing. His voice was steady, but Eleanor heard the emotion beneath. She was delicate, beautiful, completely unsuited to this life, but she tried. Lord, how she tried. What happened? Pneumonia, 3rd winter out here. Doc said her lungs weren't meant for the cold and the altitude. He tossed the stone into the gathering darkness. I blamed myself for a long time. Still do, some days. If I'd taken her back east, or built the house in town instead of out here. You loved her, Eleanor said softly. It wasn't a question. I did. But I wonder sometimes if I loved her or the idea of her. She was everything I thought I wanted, refined, educated, gentle. Turned out what I wanted and what I needed were 2 different things. Eleanor understood. I thought I wanted security, a home, a husband, the things a woman is supposed to want, but what I needed was purpose, work that matters, respect earned by my own hands. You found that here. Yes, She met his eyes. I have... Something shifted in the air between them. A recognition of kindred spirits who'd learned hard lessons about the difference between dreams and reality. Thornton's hand moved slightly, as if he might reach for hers. But then he stood abruptly. Getting late, he said. Early day tomorrow. Eleanor recognized the retreat for what it was, a man who'd been hurt, pulling back before risking hurt again. Good night, Mr. Thornton. Jacob, he said quietly. I think, that is, if you're comfortable, you could call me Jacob. Good night, Jacob. He touched his hat brim and strode away. Eleanor watched him go, her heart doing strange things in her chest. The next morning brought a crispness to the air that spoke of winter approaching. Eleanor was pulling fresh bread from the oven when Danny burst in, eyes wide with excitement. Riders coming, looks like that fancy outfit from the Double Bar Ranch. Eleanor knew the name. The Double Bar was owned by Harrison Blackwood, one of the territory's wealthiest cattlemen. According to kitchen gossip, there was bad blood between Blackwood and Jacob over water rights. She peered out the window to see 3 riders approaching. Even at a distance, she could tell they were different from the usual ranch visitors. Their horses were prime stock, their gear expensive. Jacob emerged from the barn, Frank and several others flanking him. The lead rider dismounted a man in his 40s with silver at his temples and clothes that screamed money. This had to be Blackwood himself. Eleanor couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the tension in every line of Jacob's body. Whatever Blackwood was saying, it wasn't friendly. The discussion grew heated, gestures becoming sharp. Then Blackwood pointed toward the house toward her window. Jacob's posture went rigid. He said something that made Blackwood's face darken. The man remounted and rode off, but not before casting another long look at the house. Jacob stood watching until they were out of sight, then stalked toward the kitchen. Eleanor busied herself with the bread, but her hands trembled slightly. Pack provisions for 3 days. Jacob said without preamble. I'm taking some men to check the north boundary. Is everything all right? Blackwood's making noise about the water rights again. Wants to buy me out. His jaw was tight. Made some suggestions about how I could be persuaded to sell. What kind of suggestions? Jacob's eyes met hers, and she saw real concern there. The kind that involved making life difficult for everyone on the Triple T. Don't worry, I've dealt with his type before. But Eleanor did worry. Over the next days, while Jacob was gone, she noticed things. Riders in the distance who weren't Triple T men. Gates left open that should have been closed. One morning, she found the garden trampled, though no storm had come through. Martha noticed her concern. Blackwood's a snake, she said bluntly. Been trying to force Jacob out for years. That water that runs through Triple T land is worth more than gold out here. Why doesn't Jacob go to the law? What law? The nearest marshal is 2 days' ride, and Blackwood owns half the judges in the territory. Martha's expression was grim. No, Jacob will have to handle this his own way. When Jacob returned, Eleanor could see the weariness in his shoulders. Whatever he'd found at the boundary hadn't been good. That evening, instead of joining her on the porch, he closeted himself in his study with Frank. Eleanor was preparing for bed when she heard horses outside. Not the familiar sound of ranch hands returning late, but something stealthier. She peered out her window but saw nothing in the darkness. A soft knock at her door made her heart race. Eleanor? Jacob's voice, low and urgent. She opened the door to find him fully dressed, gun belt strapped on. What's wrong? Maybe nothing, but I want you to stay inside tonight. Lock your door. Jacob, what? Please. He touched her shoulder briefly. Just trust me. She nodded, and he disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor locked her door as instructed but couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching shadows move across the yard. Once. She thought she heard voices raised in anger, but the wind carried the words away. Dawn came without incident, But when Eleanor entered the kitchen, she found Jacob already there, talking quietly with Frank and Roberts. They fell silent when they saw her. "I'll get coffee started," she said, not pressing for information they clearly didn't want to share. But she noticed things throughout the day. Extra men posted around the property, rifles kept close at hand, the tension that ran through everyone like a low current. That evening, Jacob did join her on the porch, but he carried his rifle and kept scanning the horizon. "You're scaring me," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm sorry, that's not my intention." He sighed. "Blackwood's escalating. Cut some fence wire at the north pasture, run off about 30 head of cattle. Can't you prove it was him? Knowing and proving are two different things out here." His expression was hard. "But he made a mistake coming here last week, pointing at this house. Made it personal." "I don't understand." Jacob turned to look at her fully. "He asked about you, who you were, where you came from, suggested maybe a woman alone might feel safer in town, or back east." Eleanor's blood chilled. "He threatened me." "Not in so many words, but the implication was clear." Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. "I told him if anything happened to anyone under my protection, I'd take it very personally." "I won't be run off," Eleanor said, surprising herself with a fierceness in her voice. "I've made a home here. I won't let some bully take that away." Something flared in Jacob's eyes, pride, perhaps, or something warmer. "No, I don't believe you would. You're tougher than you look. Eleanor Whitfield. I've had to be. Haven't we all?" He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to know something. If Blackwood does escalate further, if things get dangerous, I'll understand if you want to leave. I'll make sure you have passage to wherever you want to go, and wages to start fresh." Eleanor stood, facing him squarely. "Jacob Thornton, I did not survive Boston factories, my mother's death, poverty, and the humiliation at that train depot to run at the first sign of trouble. I meant what I said. This is my home now. These people," she gestured toward the bunkhouse, "they're my responsibility. You're my—" She stopped, flustered. "Your what?" he asked softly. "My employer," she finished, though they both knew that wasn't what she'd almost said. They stood there, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Then Jacob did something that surprised them both. He took her hand. "I'm glad you're here, Eleanor, more than I know how to say properly. But I need you safe. Promise me you'll be careful. No walking alone. No riding out without escort." "I promise." Her hand felt small in his calloused one, but right somehow. "And Jacob, you be careful too. I've gotten used to having coffee ready when you come in at dawn. I'd hate to break the habit." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Yes, ma'am." From the bunkhouse came the sound of a harmonica playing a lonely tune. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human troubles, but here on the porch, with her hand in his, Eleanor felt a different kind of certainty settling into her bones. Whatever came Blackwood's threats, winter's hardships, the uncertain future, she would meet it here, on the Triple T, with these people who'd become family and this man who was becoming something more. "It's getting cold," Jacob said finally, releasing her hand with apparent reluctance. "You should go in." "In a moment." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "I want to watch the stars a little longer." He nodded, understanding. "I'll keep watch tonight. Sleep easy." Eleanor went inside, but she stood at her window for a long time, watching his silhouette against the vast Wyoming sky. In 6 weeks, her entire world had changed. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed, a purpose that filled her days, and now, perhaps, something that might fill her heart. The future was uncertain. Danger lurked at the borders, but Eleanor Whitfield, mail-order bride turned frontier woman, was exactly where she belonged. The trouble started with smoke on the horizon. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she spotted it, a thin black column rising from the direction of the east pasture. Her blood ran cold. "Fire!" she shouted, dropping the wet sheet. "Fire on the range!" Men erupted from buildings like hornets from a disturbed nest. Jacob appeared from the barn, took one look at the smoke, and began barking orders. "Frank, take half the men with shovels and wet blankets. Eduardo, get every bucket and barrel we have. Danny, ride for the Coopers and anyone else within 5 miles. We need every hand." Eleanor ran to the kitchen, knowing the men would need water, food, anything to sustain them through what could be hours of fighting flames. She filled canteens, packed biscuits and dried beef into saddlebags, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "It's Blackwood." Robert spat as he grabbed supplies. "That snake's finally done it." "We don't know that," Jacob said sharply, but Eleanor saw the grim certainty in his eyes. The men rode out, leaving only a skeleton crew to guard the ranch. Eleanor wanted to go, to help, but Jacob had given her a direct order to stay. "If this is a diversion, they might come for the house. I need someone I trust here." The hours crawled by. Eleanor kept coffee hot, prepared bandages and burn salves, and watched the smoke grow thicker. Martha arrived with Ben, who could now walk with a cane, and several neighbors. The women worked together, preparing for the worst. It was near sunset when the first riders returned. They were black with soot, exhausted, but triumphant the fire was contained. But their expressions told Eleanor the victory had come at a cost. Jacob dismounted slowly, favoring his left side. A burn showed angry red through a tear in his shirt. "Lost about 50 acres of good grazing," he reported. "Could have been worse." "Let me see that burn," Eleanor demanded. "It's nothing." "Jacob Thornton, sit down and let me tend that burn. Or so help me, I'll have Frank and Roberts hold you down." A ghost of a smile crossed his soot-stained face. "Yes, ma'am." As Eleanor cleaned and dressed the burn, Jacob filled her in. The fire had definitely been set. They'd found oil-soaked rags. Worse, while they fought the flames, someone had poisoned the salt licks in the south pasture. 6 cattle were dead. More might die by morning. "He's trying to break us," Frank said, gulping coffee. "Burn us out. Kill the stock. Make it so we can't meet the Army contract." Eleanor's hands stilled. "Army contract? 1,500 head to Fort Laramie by month's end," Jacob explained. "It's what keeps the Triple T profitable. If we can't deliver..." He didn't need to finish. Without that contract, the ranch would struggle, maybe fail, and Blackwood would be there to buy it cheap. That night, Eleanor lay awake listening to the sounds of men on guard. The attack had brought everything into sharp focus. This wasn't just about water rights or land. It was about destroying everything Jacob had built, everything these people depended on. The next morning brought worse news. During the night, someone had scattered the remuda, the ranch's working horses, without mounts. The cowboys couldn't work cattle, couldn't patrol the borders, couldn't defend the ranch effectively. "That tears it," Roberts declared. "Time to take the fight to Blackwood." "No," Jacob's voice was iron. "That's what he wants, us to retaliate. Give him excuse to call in the law his law." "Then what?" Frank demanded. "Sit here while he picks us apart." Eleanor watched Jacob wrestle with the decision. She saw the moment his expression changed, hardened into resolve. "We make the delivery to Fort Laramie. Every last head, show Blackwood and everyone else that the Triple T doesn't break." He looked around at his men. "It'll mean pushing hard, working with whatever horses we can round up, maybe buying more. Every man will need to ride. No exceptions." "I'll ride," Eleanor said quietly. Every head turned to her. "You need every hand," she continued. "I can sit a horse, maybe not well, but well enough to help push cattle." "Absolutely not," Jacob said. "You just said no exceptions. You're not a hand, you're..." "I'm what?" Eleanor stepped closer to him. "The cook. Just another Eastern woman who doesn't belong out here. I've set bones, fought fires, and stood my ground when threatened. Don't tell me I can't help save the only real home I've known." The room was silent. Then Roberts, of all people, chuckled. "She's got sand. Boss, I'll give her that." "I'll teach her," Danny offered eagerly. "She's a quick learner." Jacob looked like he wanted to argue more, but Frank intervened. "We do need every hand, boss, and if Blackwood's men come while we're gone—" "They won't find easy pickings," Martha said firmly. "The women will hold the fort." Jacob's jaw worked. Finally, he nodded once. "Danny, you've got 3 days to teach her enough to not get herself killed. Roberts, see what horses you can buy in town. Frank, start gathering the herd." As preparations began, Eleanor found herself swept into a whirlwind of activity. Danny proved a patient teacher, starting her on the gentlest horse they had. Her first attempts were disasters. She bounced like a sack of potatoes, couldn't get the horse to go where she wanted, and fell off twice. But she persevered. By the second day, she could stay mounted at a walk and trot. By the third, she could help move cattle from one pasture to another without causing a stampede. "You're doing fine," Jacob told her the evening before they were to leave. He'd been watching her practice, though she'd pretended not to notice. "I won't let you down." "You couldn't if you tried." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "Eleanor, what you're doing, most women wouldn't, most men wouldn't." "I'm not most women." "No," he said softly. "You're not." They stood close in the fading light, the air between them charged with possibility. Eleanor thought he might kiss her, hoped he would. But then Danny called out about a problem with the supplies, and the moment passed. The morning of departure came cold and clear. Eleanor, dressed in borrowed pants and chaps scandalous by Eastern standards but necessary for the work ahead. She braided her hair tight, pulled on leather gloves, and tried to quiet the butterflies in her stomach. The gathered herd was impressive, over 1,500 head of prime beef, milling and bellowing in the early morning light. The crew was smaller than ideal, but every man was determined. "Listen up," Jacob addressed them all. "It's 3 days to Fort Laramie if we push hard. Blackwood knows we're moving. He'll try to stop us stampede the herd, pick off riders, whatever it takes. Stay alert, watch each other's backs, and remember, we make this delivery. We save the Triple T." They moved out as the sun broke the horizon. Eleanor rode drag with Danny, eating dust but proud to be part of it. The cattle moved like a brown river across the landscape, the cowboys keeping them bunched and moving with whistles and shouts. The first day passed without major incident, though Eleanor saw riders shadowing them on distant ridges. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, but she kept her complaints to herself. That night, as they made camp, Jacob approached her at the chuck wagon. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she lied through gritted teeth. He smiled slightly. "Liar. Here." He handed her a tin of salve. "For the saddle sores. Everyone gets them at first." His consideration touched her. "Thank you." "Eleanor—" He seemed to want to say more, but was interrupted by a shout from the night guard. Riders approaching. It was Blackwood himself, with a dozen men. They stopped just outside the firelight, guns visible but not drawn. "Thornton," Blackwood called. "Heard you're making a cattle drive. Dangerous business. Lots can go wrong on the trail." "Is that a threat?" Blackwood. Jacob's hand rested on his gun. "Just an observation. Be a shame if something happened. To the herd, to your people." His eyes found Eleanor, and his smile was cold. "Ladies shouldn't be doing men's work. Might get hurt." Eleanor stepped forward before Jacob could respond. "Mr. Blackwood, I've heard a lot about you. None of it good. But I'll tell you something, these people are my family now. This ranch is my home. And if you think you can scare me off with veiled threats and sneering looks, you're going to be disappointed." She felt the Triple T men straighten behind her, felt their pride in her words. Blackwood's face darkened. You've got a mouthy woman there. Thornton. I've got a brave one, Jacob corrected. Now get out of my camp before I forget my manners. Blackwood wheeled his horse around. This isn't over. No, Jacob agreed. It's not. After they left, Eleanor found herself shaking. Jacob's hand touched her shoulder briefly. That was well done, he said quietly. But you've made an enemy. I already had one. Now he knows it goes both ways. The next day, Blackwood's men made their move. They tried to stampede the herd at a river crossing, firing shots and whooping, but the Triple T crew was ready. They turned the cattle, kept them controlled, though it was a near thing. Eleanor found herself in the thick of it, riding hard to help turn the lead steers. Her horse stumbled, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she'd go down among the churning hooves. Then Jacob was there, grabbing her horse's bridle, pulling her to safety. You all right? He shouted over the chaos. Yes, go. They fought through the day, holding the herd together against every trick Blackwood's men tried. By evening, they were exhausted, but victorious. Fort Laramie was only hours away. That night, their last on the trail. Spirits were high. They'd done it. Despite everything, they'd held the herd and would make delivery on time. Eleanor was tending the coffee when Jacob found her. Walk with me. They strolled to the edge of camp, where the vast prairie stretched endlessly under the stars. You did good out there, he said. Better than good. You were magnificent. I was terrified half the time. But you didn't let it stop you. That's what courage is. Eleanor, not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. They stood close, shoulders touching. Eleanor felt the warmth of him, solid and reassuring. What happens when we get back? She asked. Blackwood won't stop. No, he won't, but neither will we. The Triple T has weathered worse storms. He turned to face her. Eleanor, I need to say something. These past weeks, watching you face every challenge, seeing your strength, you're not just the cook anymore. You're the heart of this place. My heart, if you'll have it. Eleanor's breath caught. Jacob. I know I'm not much for pretty words. I'm just a rancher, set in my ways, with more enemies than friends. But She silenced him with a kiss, soft and sure. When they parted, his eyes held wonder. Is that a yes? That's a yes to whatever you're asking. Jacob Thornton. He pulled her close, and they stood together under the infinite sky. Two souls who'd found each other in the vast wilderness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Blackwood would escalate. Winter would come. The ranch would face threats. But tonight, with the herd bedded down and victory within reach, Eleanor Whitfield knew she'd found what she'd never thought to look for, not just a home or a job, but a love forged in shared trials and mutual respect. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, blessing just another love story on the frontier. But to Eleanor, it was everything the end of one journey and the beginning of another, better one. The attack came at dawn, 3 days after their triumphant return from Fort Laramie. Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking glass and men shouting. She grabbed the shotgun Jacob had insisted she keep in her room and rushed to the window. Riders circled the ranch buildings, torches in hand. One sailed through the air, landing on the barn's roof. Flames began to lick at the dry shingles. Fire, all hands! Frank's voice roared across the yard. Eleanor threw on her wrapper and boots, racing to the kitchen, through the windows. She could see the Triple T men pouring from the bunkhouse, some still in their union suits, all grabbing weapons and buckets. Jacob burst through the kitchen door. Stay inside. They're trying to draw us out. The barn. We'll handle it. Do not leave this house. His eyes were fierce. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her hard and quick, then was gone. Eleanor watched through the window as the battle unfolded. The Triple T men formed a defensive line, firing at the raiders while others fought the spreading flames. But they were outnumbered 2-1. A crash from the front of the house spun Eleanor around. 3 men were forcing their way through the door. She recognized one Blackwood's foreman, a brutal man named Garrett. Well, the mail-order bride? Garrett's smile was ugly. Boss wants a word with you. Eleanor raised the shotgun. Get out of my house! Now, that's not friendly. Garrett took a step forward. You're coming with us, one way or another. Thornton will trade anything for you, even his ranch. You don't know Jacob Thornton if you think that. Maybe not, but he'll trade his life for yours. Seen it in his eyes. Garrett lunged. Eleanor pulled the trigger. The shotgun's roar was deafening in the enclosed space. Garrett flew backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. The other 2 men hesitated, shocked. Eleanor used their pause to reload. Her mother's lessons from years ago flooding back. A woman alone needs to know how to protect herself. Eleanor, the next one won't be in the shoulder, she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. You shot me, Garrett gasped. You actually shot me. And I'll do it again. Get out. The men dragged Garrett away, but Eleanor knew they'd be back. She barricaded the door, then raced through the house, checking windows, looking for other threats. Outside, the battle raged. The barn was fully engulfed now, horses screaming as men tried to lead them to safety. She saw Danny go down, clubbed from behind. Eduardo dragged him to cover while Carlos laid down covering fire. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. More riders approaching from the north. Too many. The Triple T was about to be overrun. Eleanor made a decision. Promise or no promise. She couldn't stand by while her family, for that's what they were, now was destroyed. She loaded her pockets with shells, checked the shotgun, and headed for the back door. She didn't get 3 steps onto the porch before a hand grabbed her hair. Yanking her backward, she swung the shotgun like a club, connecting with someone's ribs. The grip loosened, and she spun, firing blind. The blast caught another of Blackwood's men in the chest, dropping him. Eleanor pumped the action, turned toward the main fight. Eleanor down. She dropped at Jacob's shout. Bullets whined over her head. When she looked up, Jacob was there, pulling her behind the water trough. I told you to stay inside. They were in the house, and you're outnumbered. We've got help coming. Roberts rode for the Jamesons and McKinneys. Just have to hold. He broke off, firing at a raider trying to flank them. Eleanor peeked over the trough. The new riders were almost to the ranch, but as they got closer, her heart sank. They wore badges. The law, she breathed. Blackwood called in the law. Jacob's face was grim. His law, bought and paid for. The shooting slowed, then stopped as the lawmen rode into the yard. The leader, a heavy-set man with a marshal's star, surveyed the scene with satisfaction. Thornton, he called. I'm arresting you for assault, theft, and destruction of property. You and your men throw down your weapons. Like hell, Frank shouted. They attacked us. Not how, mister. Blackwood tells it. Says you've been cutting his fences, stealing his cattle. Now you've shot his men. Surrender peaceful, or we'll take you by force. Eleanor saw Jacob calculating odds. His men were scattered, some wounded, ammunition running low. The barn's collapse sent sparks toward other buildings, and now they faced badges, even if those badges were corrupt. She stood up. Marshal, I'm Eleanor Whitfield. I shot Garrett and another man. They forced their way into my home, threatened me. I defended myself, as is my right. The marshal's eyes narrowed. You're that mail-order bride, the one causing all this trouble. I'm the cook at the Triple T, and I'm witness to Blackwood's attacks on this ranch. The cut fences, the poisoned cattle, the fired pastures. If you're truly the law, you'll investigate those crimes too. Shut your mouth, woman, before I arrest you for interference. Arrest me then. Eleanor stepped forward, away from cover. But know that I've already written to the territorial governor about the corruption in this county. Letters sent on yesterday's stage, detailing everything. Names, dates, crimes committed and ignored. It was a lie, but the marshal didn't know that. She saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. She's bluffing. Blackwood himself rode forward, his face twisted with rage. Grab her! Grab them all! I think not. The new voice came from the north. Everyone turned to see riders cresting the hill. Real cavalry from Fort Laramie, led by Major Harrison, whom Jacob had dealt with for years. Got your message, Thornton. The major called out. Seems we arrived just in time. Eleanor felt Jacob's hand find hers. Roberts had made it to the fort, brought help. The cavalry spread out, surrounding Blackwood's men and the corrupt lawmen. Marshal Tucker. Major Harrison's voice was cold. I've had reports of your activities. Consider yourself under military arrest pending federal investigation. You can't. I can and I am. This ranch provides beef to the United States Army. Attacks on it are attacks on military suppliers. The major's smile was sharp. Federal crime. Blackwood tried to run. He didn't get far. 2 cavalrymen brought him down before he'd gone 20 yards. As soldiers rounded up the attackers, Eleanor sagged against Jacob. Is it over? She whispered. This part is. He pulled her close, heedless of watching eyes. You magnificent, brave, foolish woman. You could have been killed. So could you. We protect what's ours. Remember. Around them, the Triple T men were emerging from cover. Danny sat up, holding his head but grinning. The barn was a total loss, but they'd saved the horses and kept the fire from spreading. Miss Eleanor, Eduardo called. You shot Garrett right through the shoulder, clean as a whistle. Where'd a Boston lady learn to shoot like that? Roberts asked, admiration clear in his grizzled face. My mother believed in being prepared, Eleanor said simply. Major Harrison approached, touching his hat brim. Ma'am, Thornton, we'll need statements, but I think it's clear what happened here. Blackwood won't be troubling you again. As the soldiers led the prisoners away, Eleanor surveyed the damage. The barn still smoldered. Bullet holes marked too many walls, but the ranch stood. The people survived. We'll rebuild, Jacob said, reading her thoughts. Better than before. Yes, she leaned into his strength. We will. Frank approached, grinning despite a bloody lip. Boss, the men want to know seeing as how Miss Eleanor fought for the brand and all we think she ought to be more than hired help. What are you suggesting? Jacob asked, though his slight smile suggested he knew. Make her a partner, part owner. She's earned it. Have to marry her first, Roberts added with rare humor. Make it all legal-like. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Now wait just a minute. Not a bad idea, Jacob said thoughtfully. What do you think? Eleanor want to be my partner in everything. She looked around at the expectant faces, these rough men who'd become family, this battered ranch that had become home. Then she looked at Jacob, seeing the question in his eyes that went far deeper than business. I came here to marry a rancher, she said. Seems I ought to finish what I started. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. Danny threw his hat in the air, immediately regretted it with his sore head, but kept grinning. Eduardo and Carlos began planning a celebration. Even the cavalry soldiers were smiling. But Eleanor only had eyes for Jacob as he pulled her close. You sure? He asked quietly. This life, it's not easy. Today proved that. Today proved we can face anything together, she corrected. Besides, someone needs to make sure you men eat proper meals while rebuilding the barn. He laughed, a full, rich sound she'd rarely heard. Eleanor Whitfield, you're the best thing that ever stepped off that train. Thornton, she corrected. It'll be Eleanor Thornton soon enough. As the sun climbed higher, beginning to dry the mud and blood from the night's battle. Eleanor stood with her soon-to-be husband and surveyed their domain. The Triple T had been tested by fire literally and survived. In the distance, she could see the cavalry leading their prisoners away. Blackwood sat slumped in his saddle, a broken man. His empire built on intimidation and corruption had crumbled against something stronger, a community that stood together, that fought for each other, that refused to break. "We need to see to the wounded," Eleanor said, shifting back to practical matters. "And everyone will need feeding, and temporary shelter for the horses until the barn's rebuilt, and—" Jacob silenced her with a kiss while the men cheered again. When they parted, he was smiling. "Partner, we've got all the time in the world to sort those details. Right now, just stand with me. Let it sink in. We won." Eleanor threaded her arm through his, feeling the solid strength of him, the promise of their future together. Around them, their makeshift family began the work of putting things right, tending wounds, clearing debris, making plans. She'd left Boston as Eleanor Whitfield, desperate and alone. She'd stand before a judge soon as Eleanor Thornton, partner in the Triple T Ranch, defender of hearth and home, beloved of a good man and respected by all who knew her. The mail-order bride who'd been rejected at a train depot had become something neither she nor anyone else had expected, a frontierswoman in the truest sense, tested by fire and proven true. The first snow of winter fell on Eleanor's wedding day, dusting the ranch in pristine white like nature's own blessing. She stood before the mirror in Martha's capable hands, wearing a simple but elegant dress the women of Cedar Ridge had secretly made for her. "Hold still," Martha commanded, pinning another curl into place. "Honestly, you'd think you were facing another barn fire instead of your wedding." "I was calmer during the barn fire," Eleanor admitted, smoothing her skirts for the 10th time. Through the window, she could see the transformed ranch. In the 2 months since Blackwood's defeat, the Triple T had risen from its ashes stronger than before. The new barn stood proud and solid, built by neighbors who'd come to help without being asked. The house bore fresh paint, the bullet holes patched and forgotten. Most importantly, the ranch was thriving, the Army contract renewed for 3 years, the water rights secured permanently by federal decree. "You ready for this?" Martha asked gently. "Marriage to Jacob Thornton won't be all quiet evenings by the fire." "I don't want quiet evenings," Eleanor replied. "I had quiet in Boston. I want life, with all its chaos and challenges. I want Jacob." Martha smiled. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The main room of the house had been cleared for the ceremony. What seemed like half the territory had crowded in ranchers, townspeople, even Major Harrison from Fort Laramie. The Triple T men stood cleaned and pressed, looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best but beaming with pride. But Eleanor only had eyes for Jacob, standing tall before the traveling preacher. He wore a new black suit, his hair slicked back, but he was still unmistakably himself, solid, strong, and looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared voice. Danny, serving as usher, offered his arm. "You sure are pretty, Miss Eleanor," he whispered. "Prettiest thing the Triple T ever saw." "Thank you, Danny. You clean up well yourself." As they walked down the makeshift aisle, Eleanor caught snippets of whispered conversation. Remember when she first arrived, thought she'd last a week. Shot Garrett clean through. Best cook in the territory. Saved Carlos's leg. Stood up to Blackwood himself. Each comment was a memory, a moment that had built the foundation of her new life. By the time she reached Jacob, tears threatened despite her best efforts. He took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle. "You came," he said softly, wonder in his voice. "Did you doubt I would?" "Never, but I still can't quite believe my luck." The preacher cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we gather here on this blessed winter day to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Eleanor barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Jacob's eyes. in the promise she saw there. When prompted, she spoke her vows clear and true. I, Eleanor Whitfield, take you, Jacob Thornton, as my husband. I promise to stand beside you through drought and plenty, through storm and sunshine, to be your partner in work and rest, in joy and sorrow, to build a life and a legacy together on this land we both love. Jacob's voice was rough with emotion as he replied, I, Jacob Thornton, take you, Eleanor Whitfield, as my wife. I promise to protect and cherish you, to respect your strength and shelter your heart, to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me, to build with you a home that's more than walls and roof, but a refuge for all who need it. The rings? The preacher asked. Frank stepped forward with 2 simple gold bands. But there was something else. A small velvet pouch that Jacob took with a mysterious smile. After they'd exchanged rings, Jacob opened the pouch. There's one more thing, he said, pulling out a legal document. The deed to the Triple T, I've had it changed. Joint ownership, equal partners. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In 1878, such a gesture was almost unheard of. A married woman owning property equally with her husband revolutionary. Jacob, Eleanor breathed. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You've bled for this land same as me. You've made it a home instead of just a ranch. It's yours as much as mine, and I want the law to recognize that. Eleanor kissed him before the preacher could give permission, earning cheers from the crowd. When they finally parted, both were grinning. Well then, the preacher said, flustered but smiling, I pronounce you husband and wife, and may God help anyone who tries to come between you. The celebration that followed was legendary, even by frontier standards. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Neighbors had brought their best dishes, and Eleanor had cooked for days. Whiskey flowed freely, and Eduardo pulled out his guitar, filling the air with music. Eleanor found a moment to slip outside, needing air and quiet. She stood on the porch, looking out over the snow-covered land. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. But everything else had transformed since that desperate day at the train depot. Escaping your own party, Jacob's arms encircled her from behind. Just thinking about how I came here to marry a stranger for security, and instead, I found. She turned in his arms. Everything, home, family, purpose. You gave as good as you got, he said. This place was just buildings and cattle before you came. You made it alive. They stood together, watching snow fall in the lamplight from the windows. Inside, someone started a toast, voices raising in cheer. What now? Eleanor asked. We've fought off claim jumpers, survived fires, faced down corrupt lawmen. What's left? Jacob chuckled. Living, I suppose. Building something that lasts. Maybe raising a few children to inherit what we've protected. Eleanor's hand went to her stomach, a small smile playing at her lips. About that. His eyes widened. Eleanor, are you? Martha confirmed it yesterday. Late summer. She thinks. Jacob spun her around, laughing with pure joy. A baby, our baby. Our baby, she confirmed. The first of the next generation of Thorntons. He kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and promise into the connection. When they parted, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I love you, Eleanor Thornton, more than I have words to say. I love you too, Jacob, and I have words enough for both of us. Frank appeared in the doorway. Boss misses. Boss, everyone's wanting to toast the bride and groom. They went back inside, hand in hand, greeting their guests, accepting congratulations. Eleanor noticed a new face near the punch bowl. A young woman, travel-worn and uncertain, clutching a carpet bag. Can I help you? Eleanor asked gently. I'm looking for work. The woman said, I just arrived on the stage. Someone said the Triple T might be hiring. Eleanor exchanged glances with Jacob, who nodded slightly. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jennings. I can cook, clean, sew." "Can you handle hard work, long hours, and the occasional gunfight?" Eleanor asked with a slight smile. Sarah's chin lifted. "I can handle whatever needs handling, ma'am." "Then, welcome to the Triple T. We'll talk specifics tomorrow. Tonight, join the celebration. Danny, get Miss Jennings some food and introduce her around." As the young woman was swept into the party, Jacob squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Taking in strays already?" "Someone took a chance on me once," Eleanor replied. "Seems only right to pass it on." The party continued late into the night. Stories were told and retold how Eleanor had faced down Blackwood's men, how she'd sewn up wounds and set bones, how she'd stood shoulder to shoulder with the men during the cattle drive. Each tale grew in the telling, but the heart of them was true. A woman who'd come seeking one life had created another, better one through courage and determination. As the evening wound down, the Triple T men presented their gift, a new kitchen stove, even finer than the one lost in the fire, shipped all the way from Chicago. "Figured you'd need the best equipment," Frank said gruffly. "What with cooking for more mouths soon." Eleanor hugged each of them, these rough men who'd become brothers. Even Roberts allowed the embrace, though he grumbled about emotional females while wiping his eyes. Finally, as the last guests departed and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Eleanor and Jacob retired to their room now, officially and forever. "No regrets?" Jacob asked as Eleanor unpinned her hair. "Not one," she said firmly. "I was meant to be here. Jacob, every hard step, every challenge led me to this moment, to you, to our life together." He pulled her close, and they stood by the window, looking out at their domain. The Triple T spread before them, blanketed in snow but alive with promise. In the barn, horses nickered softly. From the bunkhouse came the faint sound of Eduardo's guitar and men's voices raised in one last song. "I was just a mail-order bride," Eleanor murmured, rejected and alone at that depot. "No," Jacob corrected, turning her to face him. "You were never just anything. You were Eleanor Whitfield, and now you're Eleanor Thornton, my wife, my partner, the woman who helped save this ranch and made it a home." As he kissed her, Eleanor felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She wasn't the desperate woman who'd stepped off that train anymore. She was a rancher, a healer, a fighter, a wife, and soon, a mother. She was exactly where she belonged, with the man she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the scars of recent battles, preparing the earth for spring's renewal. And in the warm heart of the Triple T ranch, two souls who'd found each other against all odds began their married life together, ready for whatever adventures the frontier might bring. The mail-order bride had found her millionaire rancher, but more importantly, she'd found herself. And that, Eleanor thought as she fell asleep in her husband's arms, was worth more than all the gold in the mountains. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Jacob's journey. What was your favorite moment? Let's discuss in the comments.